I'm Paul Melchior from Trout and Grouse Angling Escapes in Northbrook, Illinois. Today we're going to tie the foam-bodied hex fly. The hex hatch happens in the Midwest. It's one of the great times to catch a really large trout on a dry fly. We're going to use two different threads, a GSP thread in white and a 6/0 to 8/0 thread in yellow. The rear half of the fly is going to be tied on a needle. This needle is about 2.5 to 3 inches long. The tail is made out of pheasant tail fibers. The body is made out of 2mm yellow foam that's cut into strips about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch wide. The wing is made out of white puglacé fiber or a similar synthetic. I'm going to use two different hackles to hackle the fly, a grizzly and a dun, but you can also use a grizzly and a brown hackle if you prefer. When the fly is completed, I'm going to take a brown magic marker of some brown shade, and I'm going to color the body on the top.
Perfect, but you forgot the hook.
I noticed. Yep. Okay. Let's do it again.
Let's do it one more time.
All right. I'm Paul Melchior from Trout and Grouse Angling Escapes in Northbrook, Illinois. The hex hatch in the Midwest is one of the great times to catch a really big trout on a dry fly, and I've developed a foam-bodied pattern that hopefully will bring you some success. We're going to tie the fly in two different stages. The rear half of the fly is going to be tied on it with GSP thread, the front half of the fly with the yellow 6/0 to 8/0 thread. It's going to be tied on a size 4 low water or dry fly Atlantic salmon hook, very strong hook. The rear half of the fly is tied on a needle that's about 2 to 2.5 inches long. The tail of the fly is a couple of pheasant tail fibers. The body is made from 2mm yellow foam. The wing is made with white puglacé fiber. And the hackle is a combination of grizzly and dun, although you can also use grizzly and brown hackle. So we're going to begin with the GSP thread, and we're going to attach it to our needle, which has been inserted in the vise, and give it 3 or 4 winds. You don't want to make the winds too tight. The tail's made from either a couple pheasant tail fibers or a couple of moose tail fibers. I'm going to tie those in, leaving about 1/2 inch or so of overhang. It's not real critical. Then we're going to take two pieces of foam, one on each side, tie one in on the far side, again with about 1/2 inch of overhang, just a couple of wraps. It's going to slide around towards you. You want to slide it back, and then take the other piece of foam and tie it in on the opposite side. These tip ends do not need to match. We're going to trim them later. Give this about 3 winds, not real tight. One of the things you have to be careful with the foam and the GSP thread is that it cuts the foam very easily. Now I'm going to pull the foam back. I'm going to advance the thread 3 turns or so. I'm going to make a segment of the body, 3 turns. I'm going to advance the thread again in an equal amount to the first one, so my segments are all of equal proportion. 3 turns. Advance my thread again. Obviously, if you're tying a smaller version of this, a brown drake or something, you can make less segments, but usually for the hex pattern, I like to have 4 pretty much equal segments. And this will be our final segment. 3 turns, and then I'm going to be very careful when I pull off my extra thread that I don't cut the foam because of any extra tension here, and I'm going to do a whip finish. Because you're using the GSP thread because it's very slippery, and you can see that the foam does slip around a little bit on the hook. It's not a big problem, though. Do a 3 or 4 turn whip finish. And then trim your thread. Pull it up tight, trim it. Now you want to grab the extended body right where you first tied it in and slide it off the hook. So now you've got it, nothing's unraveled. You can remove your needle. Hold the body in very carefully with the tails in between the foam and the center. Trim off each side. Then if you want to, you can trim a little bit off each side again. So now we've got a nice extended body. If you want to just kind of take it and round it a little bit in your fingers and then set it aside. Now you want to insert your salmon hook in your vise. And now we're going to switch to the yellow 6/0 to 8/0 thread. Start your thread at the eye of the hook and wind backwards to about the halfway point on the shank. That's going to provide a reference point for you, and then bring your thread up to about the 3/4 point and trim off the excess. The wing on this is made from pugliese fiber or some similar fiber. The way that most of the time people do parachute wings is they'll tie it in facing this way, stand this part up, and trim this part back, but that provides a lot of bulk back here. Instead, we're going to tie this material in like a spinner wing, so I'm going to X-wrap it to hold it in place. Making sure it's nice and firm. Then I'm going to stand it up, kind of preen everything so I've got no loose strands. Then I'm going to go around the base with my thread. The secret to not sliding off a wing like this is to keep your thread as parallel to the hook shank as you can. I'm going to wind a fairly substantial post on the wing to provide plenty of room for the hackle to go around. The foam is going to take up quite a bit of space. Don't worry about the height of the wing. We're going to trim the wing later, so if you want to use plenty of material to make it easy to handle, that's fine. And you want to bring your thread back to the halfway point where you started and take your extended body and slide it over the hook and the distance of one segment there, and create an additional segment. Again, 2 or 3 turns. Pull it back, roll your wing out of the way, move your thread up to just in back of the wing. Again, 2 or 3 good wraps. Try not to bind down any of your wing materials if you can. Pull it back and bring it almost all the way up, your thread almost all the way up to the front of the fly, and then pull this together again and bind it down. 3 or 4 good turns. You should have a body that looks pretty much proportional all the way through. And we're going to trim the foam. Now, when you're trimming the foam, you want to give it a little tension and slide your scissors in. Being careful not to cut your thread, obviously. Any stray fibers. And then, as you're rotating your vise, you want to trim as much of the extra foam here to make it smooth and as small as you can. Then you're going to take your thread and you're going to really tie this down to create a head. If you've gotten it a little too far forward at this point and it's covering the eye, just push everything back. And you want to create a fairly substantial head here so things don't move around. And I'm going to take both of my hackle feathers. I've got a grizzly and a dun feather. You can use grizzly and brown also if you prefer. And I'm going to tie those in right at the front head area. And I want to be sure to pull them so that I have plenty of extra stem exposed here, and trim off the tips. They're not going to come loose. Hopefully, if you get into some big fish, the fly is going to be nice and rugged. I'm going to bring my thread down around the wing and around the wing, and I'm going to trap the stems against the wing and wind up the post, which is nice and stiff. Then bring my thread over the top and up to the front of the fly again. I'm going to wind my hackle now. You can usually wind them both together, starting at the top of the post and working my way downwards. You may not use the entire length of the hackle as you're winding, but you want to get a substantial amount on here so that it floats this fairly large fly. When you get up to where you're satisfied that you've got enough winds of hackle, pull it all back and then kind of let it slip forward until you get to a place that's even between the fibers. Wind down on the hackle and give it 5 or 6 good winds so it's not going to come loose. Now you can let go with your left hand, pick up the tips and trim them. You've got a nice clean head. You've got an errant stray fiber, go in and trim that. Finish the head by just kind of winding down on the hackle again and do your whip finish. And pull the wing out of the way as you're doing your whip finish. And then put a drop of head cement on there to really make it secure and durable. Now the wing is basically going to be about the height of the body. I'm going to trim that better to, if you're not sure how it's going to look, go a little long, and then you can trim it a little bit more. Then take a brown marker with the wide part of it and very gently go along the sides and the top of the body. You don't want to color this in completely. You want to leave a little yellow to shine through, because that, when you look at the natural, has a little bit of yellow on it also, or tan. So it looks a little more natural. It's after dark, and I'm not sure this is anything more than a thing for the angler. So that's the completed foam-bodied hex.